Welcome to What's the Scenario with PLRB, where we explore claims and coverage scenarios relevant to insurance professionals. I'm Brennan McLaughlin.
I'm Mike Broad.
I'm Tim Havler.
And I'm Michele Hunter, coverage counsel at PLRB.
Yay, Michelle's back again. Great.
Liability backed by popular demand.
Yeah. All right. Well, welcome, Michele. What's the scenario?
Thank you. Today's scenario is that a restaurant, which happens to be the Insured, was hosting a funeral lunch for a very large family and several friends. Also, several children were present. During this dinner reception after the funeral, a gunman entered the Insured restaurant and ended up shooting an individual. So the victim was not related to the funeral reception, but he was in the eyeshot of several of the patrons and children. Now, no one else was injured during this incident, and then the gunman quickly fled the scene, and luckily, the victim ended up surviving.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, thank goodness, right? And so what happened is the patrons got together, and especially based on their children, and filed a lawsuit against this Insured restaurant. And the Insured restaurant has a CGL policy and has tendered the suit to the insurer for coverage. The issue here at the end of the day is whether a complaint alleging purely emotional distress, because that's all this complaint alleged, is whether that constitutes bodily injury under a CGL policy.
This one reminds me of the scene in The Godfather. I think it's when Michael Corleone is just getting into the family. They're setting him up with a meeting with some of the other family members at the restaurant, and then they hide him a gun, ends up shooting somebody. So I guess I would say that is my favorite mob movie of all time, The Godfather. Anytime it's on, I'm watching it, even though it's 3 hours of my life gone every time I do, but love it. So what's your favorite mob movie, fellow?
Is that Godfather one, 2, or 3, Mike?
Godfather.
Oh, there you go.
Right?
Yes.
How about The Untouchables? That's good.
That's
good.
a different angle, but yeah, that's a good one.
Chicago Connection. I like Goodfellas would be my favorite.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah.
The Departed, I think.
Oh,
yeah.
Another good choice.
The Irish mob, yeah. So there you go. So we've covered everything from law to different mob families to the Irish mob.
Cinema.
Good job.
We've got it all.
So, Michele, I guess my first question is CGL policy. So it's going to cover property damage or bodily injury. Yeah. So
right.
what is this is emotional distress. So what is bodily injury under the policy? Would this apply at all?
That is a really good question, Mike, because as you know, in order to trigger coverage under a CGL policy, there has to be an alleged occurrence, which this would be. Nobody expected a gunman to come in and shoot somebody during a funeral reception. But in order to, like I said, trigger coverage, it has to be property damage or bodily injury. And this is alleged bodily injury, which the policy defines as sickness or disease sustained by a person, including death, resulting from any of these at any time. So sickness or disease sustained by a person, including death, resulting from any of these at any time. That's the definition of bodily injury under the CGL policy, which is a common definition. Most CGL policies have that definition.
Now, wait a minute, Michele. These onlookers, they weren't the direct victims, correct? They were
correct.
They saw horrific things.
They saw a horrific thing.
Okay, I got you. So they're now alleging that the horrific things they saw caused them bodily injury under the definition that you read.
Exactly. So that brings us to the question of, does bodily injury encompass purely mental or emotional injury? Just based on basically viewing this horrific event. That's the issue that we're facing in this scenario. And so one of the first things that we want to look at is, what state did this occur in? So for purposes of today, we're going to assume that the state was Ohio.
All right. And you know why, Michele?
Why?
Because we're all celebrating in Ohio the national championship victory of the Ohio State Buckeyes, your 2024
I had to give them
champions.
They're Amish,
Ooh.
exactly. So therefore they are the primary subject of today's coverage scenario. Well, when you look at Ohio, and we're going to see down the road that different states treat this issue differently, but what Ohio is very clear about is an allegation of just pure mental or emotional injury, like emotional distress, does not constitute bodily injury in Ohio. And they've got several cases they're saying that. And in one of the cases, this is another sad case, a mailman observed a male recipient committing suicide.
Oh, geez. Ooh.
And he tried to claim, emotional distress just based on viewing that. And the Ohio court said, nope, it's not bodily injury. You have no claim. There's no coverage.
Wow.
Yeah. So Ohio is very clear on what the law is about, basically when it comes to emotional distress. But then, in this case, you would think that maybe the family would say, but it was a funeral. Do you think that changes any of our, they're already in an emotional state from the funeral. Would that change any of our analysis?
If you're still looking at it purely, it has to cause some kind of bodily injury or issue. That's still, you're sad, but that's still not an injury. So I would say, at least in Ohio, I would say probably not.
Right? Do you guys agree?
That sounds right to me. I don't know about other states, but if Ohio is so adamant that it must be truly a bodily injury, then I think I would agree with Mike.
And you're correct. I mean, these are factual inquiries and totality of the circumstances types of, questions and issues. But when you have basically Ohio not being fuzzy on this issue at all, and some other states are, then it's very clear that no matter what, if there's not some sort of physical injury alleged, there's not going to be coverage. So, unfortunately, for this insured restaurant, witness or having hosted this event that resulted in a gunshot, there's not going to be any coverage for the restaurant.
Can I throw a scenario in there? Sorry, Brendan, to
Sure.
jump in, but let me add one element to this.
Yeah.
See, so I was so upset that I just can't eat anymore, and this ultimately led to ulcers. So now I physically have ulcers.
Right.
Totally, my doctor's going to say it's totally related to viewing this incident.
hmm
But now, maybe there's bodily injury there. Maybe
That is a very good question again, Mike. And yes, what courts are looking for, including Ohio, is if the allegations include something that's physical and not just emotional. So you could also still have the emotional claim in there, but with that physical component of an ulcer. And again, the courts look to doctor's notes, physical evidence, whatever kind of medical evidence you could submit that would prove, hey, I'm suffering physical ramifications from this. That basically would be something a court would look at. And I would say if that was alleged, which in our scenario was not, but then it would be much more likely than an Ohio court even would say, yeah, you've alleged bodily injury now. And so, how many states, if I were just to take a poll, how many states do you think are follow Ohio's approach where, strictly emotional, mental anguish, distress is not bodily injury? How many states do you think are in that camp?
Oh, I'll throw something out.
Okay.
Just because of my personal feeling here,
Mhm.
I'll guess it's majority position.
It is. Very good. Do you have a number for us?
yeah, that's not a number, Kim.
Okay. 32.
Ooh,
Did you look at my notes?
No. Is it
31.
32?
31.
ooh.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
Pretty
I
cool.
should have let everybody else guess. I'm
Yeah,
sorry
thanks,
about
Michelle.
Well,
Not a
Tim
fun
hit,
game when the other people can't participate.
Tim hit the
It
nail
was
on the
fun for
head.
me.
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that.
I would have
Next
done the
time.
old Price is Right, $1, and I would have been great.
Oh, no, I'd have been wrong.
I just didn't want the rest of you to struggle when Tim was only one off to begin with. So anyway, so what about though? Like, let's say you have a dry throat. Do you think that is a physical manifestation or more mental?
I think that means I need to be better hydrated.
Mike says go drink some water. I think it would be physical.
Yeah,
Because
I
it's
mean, I feel like there's got to be some kind of a threshold to where it's got to be serious enough.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how you would draw that line, but I feel like if a state's going to be really hard line about this, they don't want people to just be able to say, "Well, okay, I got a sore throat too," you know.
Right. Right. Exactly. And that's a good point. For example, California, and this information we'll find out later is all in the database. California said, yes, dry throat is physical. And yes, that would be covered bodily injury. So this is something you want to think about when you're making your complaint with the allegations of, how physical does it get? How about embarrassment? Got fired.
If I could sue somebody for all the times that I've embarrassed myself, I'd be a very wealthy person and I would not be on this podcast. So I'm going to say, heck no.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it.
Everybody else agrees.
Although, could you always just point to, I don't know, my cortisol levels or something?
Ooh, there's a good one.
Try
You
to
know,
type
your cheeks
some
are
sort of
flushed, you're
Mhm.
Yes.
sweating, you know,
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and there's got to be pharmaceutical bills for some of this,
Correct.
to where even if it's a purely mental issue, there's some kind of um,
Physical
You went to the doctor, you
manifestation.
paid something,
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
Like, what about high blood
therapists.
pressure? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So let's
Yes.
see. Those are cases that are out there.
Yeah, my neurotransmitters are off now.
There's definitely case law that would support high blood pressure being bodily injury. And again, it boils
Wow.
down to the way the allegations of the complaint are
Yep.
pled and whether you have supporting medical documentation to support, the physical anguish with some sort of physical symptom or manifestation. What about physical contact? Let's say in our previous scenario that the gunman hit with his shoulder one of the patrons as he was going to shoot his victim. Then what?
Hmm. So yeah, you got some kind of bruising, probably, at least you can show, and a sore.
Mhm.
Now I'm very not only the trauma of seeing somebody get shot, but and I was physically injured on
Yeah.
the person's way out. So I'm
What do
voting
you guys?
yes on this one, Michelle.
Yes. Okay. What about the rest of you?
I feel like that's even easier because you've got that physical contact, you know. You've
Hmm.
got if that's someone messing with your person. Even if
Hmm.
it doesn't leave a mark, that's still contact with your person. But
Right.
I
yeah.
third that.
Okay. Perfect. And that's true because maybe you're kind of shoved or whatever the situation is, and now you've got a physical, at least contact. Now these are kind of gray areas, but I think it would be a much stronger case for our patrons in our scenario if somehow the shooter would have, brushed up against somebody or gotten somebody out of the way in order to carry out his nefarious act. And so physical contact is something that courts look to as well. What about or psychiatric or psychological?
Ooh.
What about a scenario where the claimant suffers from alcoholism as a result of the psychiatric damage from getting fired?
Well, you do have alcohol use.
Hmm.
Is not alcoholism, isn't that a disease? So I'm leaning towards maybe on this one.
Okay, maybe.
Is
Yeah.
it a physical disease?
Yeah, good.
See, this is where they get fuzzy.
Uh-huh.
I don't know. Seems like there's a few intervening steps there. I think this is a harder case than some of the other ones we've talked about. Even high blood
Hmm.
pressure. Yeah, I think this is a little harder.
Yep. Well, you're all right. It's a gray area for sure. The one case that I found, and I added the firing part, but in this case, it was alcoholism as a result of basically, he said that he had psychiatric damage from alcoholism, and that's bodily injury, and so he should get coverage. And the court said no. And so, it can't be so attenuated from the actual act, right? So whatever the act is, and it said whatever that act is, it can't be so attenuated like that. So they were kind of saying no to psychological or psychiatric trauma. But then again, if you were prescribed all this medication because you had tremors or you couldn't sleep, what about sleeplessness?
Oh, I would be leaning towards a yes with that one potentially.
Okay.
If you
Um,
prescribe me some medication. Sorry, Tim.
Okay.
about the same level as alcoholism.
Ooh.
Okay.
Brendan, you're the tiebreaker again.
Yeah, I don't know. I think you're getting into this question of you're spending money on this. It's something that a doctor is um, concerned about.
hmm
I think I would put it a little bit more likely than alcoholism to covered, just a little bit, but
For
yeah.
sleeplessness, right. Okay. So it was a trick question because
Oh,
everybody is right. New Hampshire, in a case, said yes, that's bodily injury,
all right. I
sleeplessness,
love New Hampshire. It's a good state.
right? I mean, but another state said no, that also has two letters that begins with an N. Can you guess it?
No.
No. New Jersey.
Oh,
New
wow.
Jersey said no, sleeplessness is not bodily injury in
How
terms of
about in
coverage.
Seattle? Um,
Oh,
sleep.
right. Sleepless in Seattle. Let's go back to the movie theme. That's right. I
Yeah.
love it. So anyway, that's pretty much the bottom line of how courts approach this. And like I said, it gets fuzzy when there's a little bit of physicality involved, but it's mainly just emotional and mental. And so you absolutely want to know what your state that you're in, how they treat this issue.
And as the only non-attorney in the group today, is fuzzy, is that a legal term, Michelle, that
That's
you
a
feel that?
very technical legal term that you should definitely include in anything that you're writing. Yes,
All right.
absolutely. Fuzzy. Actually, if it's funny you asked that because a court did say this is a fuzzy issue.
Aha. See, oh, awesome.
So yes, Mike, it's a technical legal term.
Perfect.
All right. So, Michelle,
Mhm.
what can we take away from this scenario?
Right. So basically, one, know your jurisdiction, know your state. Two, really look at the allegations in the complaint and know that if you're in a state like Ohio and it only alleges emotional or mental anguish, you're not going to get coverage. You really want to find that line between the physical manifestation of something and whether that's alleged or whether it's purely emotional. And then the last takeaway is just don't be part of any, movie scenes after a
Right.
funeral.
Hey, and Mike, where can an adjuster go to learn more?
Well, Tim, you know the answer to that question. Our fabulous website, www.plrb.org. Check us out there. If you look under the legal hub, be the liability casualty legal hub, check out stuff like policy annotations. There's a great annotation there on bodily injury and how it's defined, so check that out. Also review some coverage replies. One was is emotional distress. Is it a bodily injury? I'll read that and you'll find out more. Also, would negligent infliction of emotional distress be covered under a CTO policy? Another coverage review and reply that you can check out there. So, haha. So, Brennan, as always, we'd like to share, right? So, could we share these fine links with all of our listeners and viewers?
Yes, and there you'll also find a recap of the key points from this episode and links to our social media. Don't forget to subscribe and rate us, and please give us a call at 630-509-8704 and leave a voicemail to share your adjuster story. We'll see you next time.
Hey, Brennan, before we leave, though, have we had a phone call yet?
Not yet.
Oh, come on, people.
Somebody,
I know.
this warrants a phone
Right.
call. This one.
Right, come on. Give that number again, Brennan.
That is 630-509-8704.
Come on, people, call.
Call in and we promise we'll have Michelle back next week.
Right.
All memory.
Okay.
The views and opinions expressed in this resource are those of the individual speaker and not necessarily those of the Property and Liability Resource Bureau, its membership, or any organization with which the presenter is employed or affiliated. The information, ideas, and opinions are presented as information only and not as legal advice or offers of representation. Individual policy language and state laws vary, and listeners should rely on guidance from their companies